black man is humiliated and wrongfully imprisoned. When he reveals what happened, everyone is shocked. When Asa Vance moved with his family to the quiet town of Littlefield, he never imagined that a walk from work to home would drastically change the fate of his family and an entire community. But before I tell you, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any exciting stories. Asa was driving down the long road that led his family to the small town of Littlefield. In the passenger seat, Cora, his wife, held a crumpled map, looking at the horizon as if trying to see the future that awaited them there. Their children, Elora and Zeke, were in the back seat, lost in their own thoughts. Everyone was worried. Littlefield was new territory, and being one of the few black families in a predominantly white town was no small change. Upon arriving in the town, Asa felt a knot in his stomach, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. White wooden houses lined the quiet streets, and a sign at the town's entrance read, "Welcome to Littlefield, where the future is bright." Asa parked the car in front of their new home, a cozy building with a charming porch. "Here we are," he announced with enthusiasm that masked his anxiety. Elora, 12 years old, got out of the car and looked around cautiously. She was a smart girl, always observant and thoughtful. Zeke, 10 years old, seemed more excited, running off to explore the yard. Inside the house, Cora admired the living room lit by the afternoon sun. "It's a new beginning," she said, as if trying to convince herself. Asa hugged her from behind, kissing the top of her head. "We'll make this a home. All of us together." The next day, Asa started his new job as a manager at a local store. The store, called Thompson's Mercantile, was the heart of the town, a place where everyone seemed to know each other. Asa was welcomed by Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a warm smile. "Welcome to the family, Asa," he said, shaking Asa's hand firmly. Asa felt a weight lift off his shoulders. At least here, he seemed to be welcome. Meanwhile, Cora was preparing for her first day as a teacher at the local school. She had always loved teaching and believed in the power of education to change lives. However, the idea of being one of the few black teachers in town made her apprehensive. In the mirror, she looked at her reflection and took a deep breath, repeating to herself that she was enough, that she would make a difference. Their children, Elora and Zeke, were also getting ready to face their first day at the new school. Elora was nervous, her hands sweaty as she adjusted her backpack. "You'll do great," Asa assured her, kneeling beside her. "Just be yourself. You're amazing." Zeke, on the other hand, was excited, already dreaming about the new friends he would make. At school, Elora was greeted with curious looks. Some children whispered as she passed by, but she held her head high, determined to prove that she deserved to be there. Zeke, being more outgoing, quickly engaged in a conversation with some classmates about his favorite video game. By the end of the day, the family gathered at home for dinner. Asa listened attentively as each one shared their experiences. Elora, hesitant at first, finally admitted, "Some people were nice to me. Maybe it's not so bad." Zeke, with childlike enthusiasm, told stories about school, leaving Asa and Cora relieved. As night fell, Asa and Cora sat on the porch, watching the stars. "I think we managed to get through the first day," Cora said softly, holding Asa's hand. He squeezed her hand, feeling a wave of gratitude for having such a strong partner by his side. "It's just the beginning," Asa replied, smiling. "We're going to build something here. We'll prove that we belong in this place." It was a hot afternoon in Littlefield, and Asa Vance had just finished another long day of work at Thompson's Mercantile. He bid farewell to his colleagues with a tired yet satisfied smile and walked out the front door. As he strolled down the main street, Asa's thoughts wandered to his family at home. He imagined Cora preparing dinner, Elora immersed in her schoolbooks, and Zeke running around the yard, full of boundless energy. But before heading home, Asa decided to buy a coffee. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was irresistible, and he needed that little boost for the rest of the day. The cafe, called Little Perk, was a popular meeting spot, and Asa enjoyed the cozy atmosphere and friendly conversations he often found there. He walked into the cafe, greeted the barista with a smile, and ordered a cappuccino. While waiting for his order, Asa noticed a few customers looking at him with curiosity. He was used to the stares in the small town, where his presence seemed to serve as a constant reminder that he was different from most. But he was determined not to let it affect him. With the coffee in hand, Asa left the cafe, ready to return home and enjoy time with his family. However, as he stepped onto the sidewalk, he was abruptly intercepted by two police officers. Sergeant Gage, a robust man with a stern expression, and Officer Merle, younger but equally intimidating, approached quickly. "Hey, you there!" Sergeant Gage shouted, his voice cutting through the afternoon air. Asa stopped, surprised and confused. "Yes, you. Stop right there." Asa blinked, incredulous. "What's going on, gentlemen?" "We received a report that someone matching your description stole something from the store," Officer Merle said, his eyes narrowing as he examined Asa from head to toe. Asa felt a knot forming in his stomach. "Me? Stealing? No, there must be some mistake. I work at Thompson's Mercantile. I just got off my shift." The officers didn't seem convinced. "We need to search you," Sergeant Gage declared, already moving in to frisk him without giving Asa a chance to respond. Asa raised his hands, trying to remain calm. "Gentlemen, I'm telling the truth. I'm the manager there. Mr. Thompson can confirm this." But his words seemed to be lost in the wind. The officers pushed him against the cafe wall, beginning to search him aggressively. Asa felt the indignity of the unfolding situation, a feeling of powerlessness he had never wished to experience. A small crowd began to gather around them. Asa could feel people's gazes on him, mixed with curiosity and disbelief. Some people pulled out their cell phones, starting to film the incident. He heard whispers around him, voices saying things like, "Did he really do that?" and "This doesn't seem right." Asa tried to argue again, his voice choked by a mix of frustration and humiliation. "Please, listen to me. You are making a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." However, the officers continued with their search, ignoring Asa's protests and the onlookers' gazes. Asa felt Merle's hands rifling through his pockets while Gage held his arm tightly. Asa closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain the rising wave of emotions inside him. Fear, anger, and shame made him feel as if he was about to explode. At that moment, a woman in the crowd, a young mother with a child in her arms, stepped forward. "This isn't right," she exclaimed, her voice raised. "Leave him alone, he hasn't done anything wrong. I see him at the store every day, he's a good man." Her protest echoed among the people around, some agreeing with murmurs. But the officers stood their ground, indifferent to the voices of support for Asa. The tension in the street was palpable as if time had frozen, with Asa at the center of this whirlwind of looks and judgments. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officers stopped searching Asa. Merle looked at Gage and shook his head negatively. "Nothing," he murmured, almost disappointed. Asa stepped back, adjusting his clothes with trembling hands, still processing what had just happened. Sergeant Gage looked at him for another moment before finally stepping back. "You can go," Gage said, his voice harsh. "But keep an eye out. We'll be watching." Asa didn't respond. He just nodded, fighting the urge to say more. He knew his words wouldn't change anything at that moment. Instead, he walked away, feeling the weight of the incident on his shoulders as the crowd began to disperse. As he walked back home, Asa felt every step as if he was carrying the world on his back. He knew he would have to tell Cora what had happened and that this would be just the beginning of a long journey for justice and equality. The emotional scars of that day remained with him, but Asa promised himself that he would not let it define him. He would fight for his dignity and the safety of his family, no matter how difficult the road ahead. The morning following the incident, Littlefield awoke under the shadow of a new reality. Asa rose early, trying to shake off the weight of the previous day's humiliation. As he prepared coffee in the kitchen, he could hear Cora speaking quietly on the phone, likely with her sister. It was obvious that the situation was still fresh in their minds, like an open wound. The children, Elora and Zeke, came down for breakfast with curious and worried expressions. Asa realized they had overheard parts of the conversation between him and Cora the night before when he recounted what had happened on Main Street. "Daddy, are you okay?" Zeke asked, his big eyes fixed on his father. Asa forced a reassuring smile. "I'm fine, champ. It was just a misunderstanding, nothing for you to worry about." But even as he said those words, Asa knew that his children's world had changed. The video of the incident, filmed by one of the witnesses at the scene, had gone viral on social media. It showed the aggressive approach of the police officers, and Asa's humiliation was evident in every second of the footage. Littlefield, a town that rarely attracted attention, was now the focus of heated discussions online and in other towns. At school, Elora and Zeke felt the shift in atmosphere. Some classmates avoided talking to them, while others asked uncomfortable questions. Zeke, in particular, seemed to absorb all this in a way that deeply worried Cora. He had always been an outgoing and energetic child, but now he was withdrawing as if he wanted to become invisible. The situation at school mirrored the division beginning to emerge in the Littlefield community. Throughout the town, people were taking sides. Some residents defended Asa, acknowledging the injustice of what had happened. Others, however, believed that the police were just doing their job and that Asa should have cooperated without resistance. The debates extended across cafes, bars, and town meetings, with polarized opinions. Cora was visibly concerned. She knew the situation was affecting their family more deeply than Asa was willing to admit. They needed support, and the community's pressure was making everything harder. "Asa, we need to do something," she said one evening over dinner. "This is impacting our lives, the kids' lives. We can't let this go on like this." Asa knew she was right. He felt an urgent need to protect his family and seek justice for what had happened. It wasn't just about the incident itself but what it represented, a symbol of something much larger than his own experience. Determined not to let the situation be forgotten or swept under the rug, Asa began to consider his options. He knew he would face resistance, but he also knew he had to do something, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever been through similar situations. He started gathering evidence and witnesses who could support him. With Cora's help, he reached out to lawyers who could advise them on how to proceed. The family was determined not to let the incident become just another forgotten story. Meanwhile, the outcry continued to grow. Asa began receiving messages of support from people in other towns, individuals who had watched the video and were outraged by how he was treated. This wave of solidarity gave him the strength to keep fighting, even in the face of adversity. Cora, in turn, made it a point to keep the focus on their children, trying to mitigate the impact of the event on their lives. She spoke with Elora and Zeke, ensuring they felt loved and safe, even in times of uncertainty. "You don't need to be afraid," she told them. "We're in this together as a family. And we will overcome it." As time passed, the situation in Littlefield began to take on proportions that no one could have predicted. The town seemed more divided than ever, and the incident remained the main topic of conversation everywhere. "We have to find someone who understands this kind of situation, Asa," Cora said, her tone calm but firm. "We can't fight this battle alone." Cora had spent the entire night researching lawyers who might be able to help. That's when she came across the name Noah Sweeney, a lawyer known in the region for handling cases of racial discrimination and social injustice. Asa hesitated for a moment, thinking about what it would mean to expose his life to a complete stranger, but he knew it was necessary. "Let's call him," Asa finally agreed. "We need someone who can guide us through this." A few hours later, Asa and Cora were sitting in Noah's office. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair and a calm, almost paternal demeanor. He listened attentively as Asa recounted his story, detailing the incident on Main Street and the fallout that followed. "I understand how you feel, Asa," Noah said after hearing everything. "These cases can be complicated, but I'm here to fight for you. I've seen many situations like yours, and that's why it's important to expose this injustice." Noah explained the legal process and the potential challenges they might face. "This might take some time, and there will be pressure," Noah warned. But if you're willing to move forward, I'll do everything I can to seek justice." With renewed determination, Asa and Cora left Noah's office feeling that they were finally taking concrete steps to rectify the situation. They were not alone, and having legal support was an important step. Meanwhile, the Littlefield community began showing signs of support. One of the first people to speak out was Shelby, Asa and Cora's neighbor. Since they had moved to the town, she had always been a loyal friend, and now she was becoming an essential pillar. "You're not alone in this," Shelby said when she met them on the sidewalk. "If you need anything, I'm here to help. And if there's anything we can do as a community, you can count on me." Shelby's words warmed Asa's heart. Amid all the negativity, this kind of solidarity was a blessing. Shelby's presence by their side served as a reminder that, despite the divisions, there were people who believed in justice and were ready to stand by them. Cora also decided that she wanted to be more actively involved in issues of inclusion and diversity in the town. She began participating in local groups that promoted these values, seeking ways to educate and engage the community in a more constructive dialogue. "I refuse to sit by and let this happen without doing something," she told Asa as they walked home after a meeting. "We need to build a community where our children don't have to live in fear or discrimination." Cora's determination was inspiring, and Asa knew she was right. They needed to fight not just for their family but for all families who might face the same struggles. The morning was cold and gray when Asa entered the Littlefield police station, with a racing heart and a mind full of conflicting thoughts. He had received a summons for a meeting with Captain Rollins, the town's police chief. There was something unsettling in the tone of the summons, and Asa didn't know what to expect. The only thing he knew for sure was that he wouldn't back down. Upon arriving at the meeting room, Asa was greeted by Captain Rollins, a middle-aged man with an authoritative expression. Rollins, seated behind a large, dark desk, looked at Asa with a cold, calculating gaze. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Vance," Rollins began, his voice formal and emotionless. "I want to better understand your perspective on the recent incident." Asa took a deep breath, preparing himself for the confrontation he knew was coming. "I'm not here to discuss the incident," Asa said firmly. "I'm here to demand justice. What happened to me was an act of discrimination, and I won't give up." Captain Rollins furrowed his brow, visibly irritated. "I understand your position, but you should consider the impact this will have on our community. Perhaps it would be better to let this matter go and move on. What you're seeking may be more complicated than you realize." Captain Rollins's words were like a cold blade, attempting to cut through Asa's resolve. But Asa remained steadfast. "I can't ignore what happened. My family and I have the right to be treated with respect. If that means confronting the police, then that's what I'll do." The tension in the room mounted, and Rollins tried to soften the situation, but the disdain in his tone was palpable. He paused, giving a significant look to Officers Gage and Merle, who were present as witnesses. "If you insist on proceeding, understand that there may be consequences for everyone involved." Officers Gage and Merle, who had remained silent until then, began to speak. They tried to justify their actions, claiming that Asa had acted suspiciously when leaving the store. "The situation seemed odd," said Gage with a dismissive look. "We had to act with caution." Asa looked at them, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. "What I did was simply leave a cafe. If I appeared suspicious, then it's a reflection of the prejudice we're dealing with, not something I did." Captain Rollins abruptly stood up, ending the meeting. "Very well, Mr. Vance. If you're determined to move forward, you'll have to deal with the consequences. And if there are further public actions regarding this case, our approach will be firmer." Leaving the station, Asa felt a whirlwind of emotions. The meeting had been draining, and the obstacles seemed greater than ever. But what truly shook him was the sense of being attacked not only by the injustice of the incident but now also by the attempt to silence him. However, as Asa drove back home, he remembered Shelby's words and the community that was beginning to rally in support. The division in the town was deepening, with heated debates on social media and tense community meetings. The polarization was growing, but so were the voices rising in defense of Asa and his family. Upon entering the house, Asa found Cora and the children gathered in the living room, anxiously waiting for news. Asa took a deep breath and shared the news, trying to stay calm, but his words were filled with determination. "They tried to convince us to give up," Asa said. "But we won't back down. We'll keep fighting. Not just for us, but for everyone who has been through something like this." Cora's eyes filled with tears, but a hopeful smile appeared on her face. "We're in this together, Asa. And we'll fight until the end." Since the incident with their father, Elora and Zeke had become the target of curious glances and, worse, prejudiced comments. Zeke, who had always been a calm kid, was now struggling with feelings of anger and frustration. During recess, a group of students began making cruel jokes about his father's situation. "Your dad must be a criminal, otherwise, why would he be stopped by the police?" One of the boys laughed, and the others followed with mocking laughter. Zeke tried to ignore it, but the weight of the words became unbearable. The anger exploded when one of the boys made a particularly offensive joke, insinuating that Zeke and his family didn't belong in the town. Without thinking, Zeke punched the boy, knocking him to the ground. The fight was quick but enough to attract the attention of several students and, of course, the teachers. When Zeke was called to the principal's office, his heart was racing uncontrollably. He knew his actions could have serious consequences but couldn't endure the injustices and constant attacks any longer. He felt alone and isolated, as if the world was against him and his family. Cora, upon learning of the incident, immediately headed to the school. She arrived with a mix of concern and determination etched on her face. Upon meeting with Principal Mrs. Reynolds, Cora wasted no time. "My family is going through a tough time, and what's happening to my children at school is unacceptable. I need the administration to take a strong stand against bullying and racism. It's not fair that they're being treated this way." The principal listened attentively, her expression shifting from surprise to a serious look of concern. "I understand your frustration, Cora. We are dealing with a delicate situation, and I will ensure that we take the necessary measures. The school has a policy against bullying and racism, and we need to reinforce that." As Cora discussed the situation, Elora faced her own silent battle. She tried to find a supportive group of friends but felt isolated and misunderstood. The conversations around her were full of murmurs and curious glances, and she felt constantly watched and judged. In the classroom, Elora struggled to focus on the lessons, but sadness and anxiety were hard to ignore. Each laugh or whispered comment seemed like a cruel reminder that, despite her attempts to fit in, she was different and being treated as such. When Cora returned home, she found Asa waiting for her. They embraced, their expressions laden with exhaustion and concern. "They're going through a tough phase," Cora said, her voice trembling. "But we will do everything we can to make sure they feel safe and supported. It won't be easy, but we have to fight for them. We can't let fear and prejudice dominate our lives. Our children deserve a better future." The sound of cameras and microphones, the buzz of reporters, and the click of photographers were new to Asa Vance. After the video went viral and the increasing attention the case was receiving, local media decided to focus on the incident that shook Littlefield. Asa was about to become the face of a larger struggle. He prepared for the interview with a mix of nervousness and determination. Each step toward the studio felt heavier than the last, but he knew his voice was crucial at that moment. As he entered the studio, he was met by reporter Lisa Harmon, a woman with a serious yet understanding expression. "Mr. Vance, thank you for being here," Lisa said, adjusting the microphone. "We're here to hear your story and understand what really happened. Can you tell us what happened that day?" Asa took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts and emotions. "I was leaving the cafe when I was stopped by the police. I was accused of stealing something from the store where I work, even though I am an employee there. I was searched aggressively and without cause. The worst part was seeing it done in front of a lot of people." Lisa listened attentively, her gaze softening as Asa spoke. She knew this interview was more than just news, it was a chance to give voice to someone facing injustice. As Asa shared his experience, the cameras recorded every word, and the studio was filled with a respectful silence. The subsequent report was impactful. The article highlighted the discrimination Asa had faced and exposed the flaws in how the local police handled the case. Asa Vance is a symbol of resistance in Littlefield, read the headline. His fight for justice reveals a deeper problem of systemic racism that needs to be addressed. The impact was immediate. Calls started coming in, not just from local journalists, but from media outlets outside the city. Reports began appearing in newspapers and news channels across the country. Each coverage amplified Asa's message and increased the pressure on local authorities to act fairly. As the case gained national attention, Asa's story became a powerful symbol for many who had faced similar situations. Across various places, Asa's story resonated with those who had suffered discrimination and injustice. They saw his struggle as an opportunity to raise their voices and demand change. Cora watched the news with a mixed feeling of pride and concern. She knew the visibility brought the chance to create significant change, but also feared the growing pressure and scrutiny her family would face. Each report, each interview, was not just a way to expose injustice but also a way to reopen wounds that were far from healing. Asa, on the other hand, felt a new responsibility. His fight was not just for him and his family but now represented the quest for justice for all those who were silent and forgotten. He was determined to use the platform he had to make a real difference, even if it meant facing even greater challenges. At the same time, support began to come in various forms. People in Littlefield and other cities started organizing peaceful protests and engaging in discussions about racism and equality. The visibility of Asa's story had transformed into a movement that sought not only justice for him but a better future for all. In the following days, Asa and Cora began planning a community meeting. The goal was simple but ambitious: to bring the people of Littlefield together to discuss racial discrimination and explore ways to address the issue. They managed to book the town's community hall, a large enough space to accommodate everyone interested. They invited community members, civil rights activists, and even local police representatives, hoping everyone would be willing to listen and participate in the conversation. The day of the meeting arrived, and the hall was filled with people from various backgrounds and experiences. There was a palpable energy in the air, a mix of nervousness and hope. Asa and Cora prepared to speak but were met with a warm round of applause as soon as they entered. The community's support was evident, and it gave them a sense of strength. With a voice slightly trembling but full of determination, Asa shared his experience honestly and vulnerably. "I never imagined that facing discrimination could become so personal. But when I saw how racism can manifest even in the most everyday situations, I realized it was time to speak out and seek change." As he spoke, others began to stand up and share their own stories. There were accounts of subtle and explicit discrimination, experiences of prejudice that were often ignored or minimized. One of the most moving moments of the evening was when Samuel Jefferson, a civil rights activist, addressed the audience. "We are here not just to listen, but to make a difference. This is the beginning of a movement that will transform Littlefield into a place where everyone feels safe and respected. Let's work together to make this happen." The presence of local police representatives was a significant factor. Captain Rollins and some of his colleagues listened attentively, and although the tension was palpable, there seemed to be an openness to constructive dialogue. The meeting was not an opportunity for blame, but to build bridges and find solutions. Many expressed the need for more diversity and inclusion training for officers and greater community engagement. The atmosphere at the meeting was transformative. The event began to evolve into a movement of unity and solidarity. People from different backgrounds and experiences committed to working together, supporting one another, and demanding concrete changes. The day Asa and Cora had feared but also hoped for finally arrived. The lawsuit against officers Gage and Merle was about to begin, and the town of Littlefield was in a frenzy of anticipation and nervousness. Asa had decided to move forward with the lawsuit, a choice that involved courage and determination, and that was now becoming the focal point of a much larger battle. Noah Sweeney, the lawyer Asa and Cora had chosen, was leading the legal team with impressive fervor. Known for his work on discrimination cases, Noah was committed to ensuring that the truth came to light. Noah's team prepared a robust case, presenting evidence of racial discrimination and detailing the unfair treatment Asa had endured. The courthouse was surrounded by a tide of protests and support. Outside the building, a crowd of demonstrators gathered, holding signs that called for justice and equality. The courtroom was packed, with the jury and judge ready to hear the allegations. The police defense tried from the start to paint Asa as a troublemaker, someone who was exaggerating the situation and creating unnecessary drama. The defense attorney attempted to discredit Asa's claims, arguing that he was merely seeking attention and that the officers had acted according to procedures. However, Noah and his team were prepared for this. They presented compelling evidence of racial discrimination. Witnesses, including customers from the store where Asa worked, confirmed that he had never displayed suspicious behavior. Videos and testimonies clearly showed that the officer's aggression was unjustified. As the trial progressed, tension in the town increased. People began to realize the seriousness of the situation and the importance of fighting for justice. Many of Asa's supporters gathered in front of the courthouse to show solidarity and push for a fair outcome. The community was deeply divided. While some continued to support the officers, believing they were just doing their job, others began to see the case in a new light. The trial revealed a harsh reality that many had ignored or minimized for too long. Asa, although exhausted and emotionally drained, felt a glimmer of hope. He knew the fight was far from over, but Noah's determination and the growing awareness in the community gave him strength. The truth was being exposed, and this was a crucial step toward justice. As the court prepared for the next day of the trial, Asa and Cora met with Noah and his team. They discussed what was to come and prepared to face the next challenges. The courtroom was filled with tense silence as Asa Vance's trial continued. Throughout the trial, several witnesses were called to testify, but the presence of Shelby Anderson was particularly significant. Shelby, the neighbor who had become a friend of the Vance family, had witnessed the incident from outside the cafe. Her testimony was eagerly awaited, as she was one of the few people who could provide a direct account of what happened. When Shelby entered the courtroom, she found herself surrounded by inquisitive stares. With a mix of nervousness and determination, she recounted her version of the events. Shelby described in detail the aggressive behavior of the police officers and how unjustly Asa was treated. Her words were powerful and filled with sincerity. In addition to Shelby's testimony, security camera footage that clearly captured the incident was presented. The courtroom screen displayed footage showing Asa leaving the cafe calmly, with no indication of suspicious behavior. The recordings unmistakably showed that the actions of officers Gage and Merle were not only abrupt but disproportionate. The security camera footage revealed the interactions in detail, confirming that Asa had been treated unfairly. As the videos were shown, the courtroom filled with murmurs of surprise and indignation. The shock in the community was palpable. Many people who had initially supported the officers began to question their actions, recognizing that what they had seen was a clear demonstration of racial prejudice. The weight of the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The trial continued to hear evidence and testimonies, and the tension only increased. Each day seemed to bring new challenges, but Asa felt a renewed determination to see the process through to the end. The courtroom was filled with anticipation as the judge prepared to announce the verdict. The room was silent, with the tension visible on the faces of those present. Asa and Cora, sitting side by side, held each other's hands tightly, their sweaty palms reflecting the nervousness and hope that had accompanied them since the beginning of this tumultuous process. After days of intense trial and meticulous examination of the evidence, the time for the verdict had finally arrived. The judge, with a serious expression, began to read the decision. The sound of his words echoed in the room, and Asa's heart seemed to beat faster with each syllable. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimonies, the judge began, "The jury has found officers Gage and Merle guilty of misconduct and racial discrimination." A collective sigh swept through the room. Asa closed his eyes for a moment, feeling a profound and indescribable relief. Tears began to stream down Cora's face as she looked at her husband with a mix of relief and pride. Police Chief Rollins then took the floor. His voice was grave and tinged with resignation. Based on the court's decision, the involved officers will be dismissed from their positions. Additionally, we will initiate a comprehensive review of police practices in our city to ensure that situations like this do not happen again. Rollins's words were met with murmurs of approval and, in some cases, skepticism. For many in the room, the dismissal of the officers and the promise of reform were significant steps, but still not enough. Justice for Asa and his family was a symbol of change, but true transformation in Littlefield was just beginning. As Asa and Cora embraced, surrounded by friends and supporters, they felt a mix of emotions. The courtroom victory was a significant achievement, but the road ahead was still full of challenges. The Littlefield community was now more united than ever, and the court's decision had become a catalyst for broader discussions on justice and equality. As the community began to process the impact of the verdict, Asa and Cora were determined to use their experience to inspire and empower others to stand up against injustice. And you, what would you have done in Asa's place? Would you have sought justice as well? Let me know in the comments.